April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and this particular week is End Street Harassment Week. And given all the stuff that's been going on in pop culture, I wanted to share a story, a personal experience that really drove home for me how patriarchy and racism are interdependent, and how there's no getting rid of one if you're not willing to fight the other. So one day I'm walking home from the subway at night, and the only other person on the street is a young man of color who's walking behind me. Uh, Black male, African American, Afro Latino, late teens, early 20s. And initially, his presence didn't bother me. It was only after I had walked a couple of blocks and he was still behind me that I grew uncomfortable. So I did what a lot of women do, especially those of us who've been raised in urban environments, which is you use your body language to signal that you're aware of your surroundings, and you do that in the hopes that should there be any negative intentions towards you, you'll prevent that. That because you're aware, you're not the ideal victim. And so I let it be known through my body language to this young man that I'm aware of his presence and that I have found him comfortably close for too long. And his response to my behavior was to cross the street. And when I realized that he had done that, it brought to mind the work of a particular organization. Uh, I think it still exists. It's called the Brotherhood Sister Soul in Harlem, and it was co-founded by two men of color, one who I know. And I remember him sharing stories about the kinds of work that they did with young people, um, and particularly what I call the politics of the pavement. So I remember him sharing how, like, for example, he would tell girls that if a boy in your school calls one of you a bitch, and all of you decide that because of that disrespect, none of you are going to give him play, uh, you would radically change the culture in your school because you have a lot more power than you think, not only individually, but especially as a collective. I remember him saying how they would teach boys that if you're walking down the street and you find yourself behind a girl or a woman and she seems uncomfortable, that, without any drama or huff and puff, you cross the street. That this isn't personal, that this is what misogyny has wrought. That women walk down the street fearful for their safety, and so you should cross the street to communicate that you're in no danger. And so I'm thinking about this. This comes to me when I realize that this young man crossed the street, and maybe it's just wishful thinking, but to this day, I really do believe that he crossed the street because he saw that I was uncomfortable with him, trailing behind me, and he wanted to communicate to me that I was safe and that he wasn't a threat to me. And so I find myself now wanting to actually make eye contact with him. He's a little bit ahead of me now on his side of the street, and I even kind of speed up a little bit. So I'm on my side of the street, he's on his, and I'm trying to, see if he will look my way so I can give him a smile or an up nod, and to let him know that I know what you did, I understand why you did it, and I appreciate you for it. And it was in that moment of appreciation that I found myself filled with so much compassion for that young man, for myself and for that young man. Because in my wanting to behave in ways that hedge the bets for my safety, I might have inadvertently behaved in ways that hurt him. That in doing what I needed to do in order to feel safer, that I criminalized him and demonized him. And meanwhile, he was no threat to me. So for a long time before that, I had this kind of intellectual, abstract understanding of how patriarchy and racism are two sides of the same coin, and how there's no eradicating one without a fight to eradicate the other. But in that experience, as I'm walking down one side of the street, And this young man is walking on the other side of the street, and we're both probably reflecting on how we feel unsafe in this society for no other reason than we are who we are. That's when it drove home for me. In order to feel safe, we need to be divided. And I still feel guilt around treating that young man in that way. And yet, I wouldn't do a damn thing differently. Because as much as I didn't want to hurt him, I don't want to be hurt. And so that's why it is no little thing when Lil Wayne raps about beating the pussy up like Emmett Till. That's why it's really problematic that we have this language of sex and violence, of rape, beat, smash, hit, gut, pound. That's why it is a problem when Rick Ross rhymes about slipping a Molly in a woman's drink and taking her home and having sex with her without her consent. It's because patriarchy and racism are two sides of the same coin that even when an ally like Talib Kweli does the right thing, but does so imperfectly and gets pushed back and he can't hear it, and the conversation stops and devolves into a hostile standstill, that's why that's extremely painful. And so I share that story of that aha moment for me because I'm hoping it's a really concrete example of why we need more men of color to really consider that feminism has something to offer them in their struggle against racism. Because what our society says makes a man doesn't serve your interests. And when you either defend, excuse, or stay silent in the face of men who harass, who rape, who otherwise engage in any kind of oppressive, violent behavior that you yourself would not ever commit, what you communicate to the sisters is that it's more important for you to be a man, even though what makes a man in this society, number one, wasn't defined with you in mind because racism did not see you as a human being. And number two, actually perpetuates all the racist ideas of what men of color are like. When you apologize for rape and make excuses for street harassment, what you're actually doing is perpetuating the same ideas that black men and men of color have no control over their urges and are not human. So if it's really of interest to you to liberate yourself from racist ideas, and you really should think about investigating feminism for yourself and realizing how ideas of masculinity that you are wedded to don't serve you. A lot of brothers get mad at sisters for being feminists, even though there are a lot of brothers are feminists themselves. But a lot of men get angry, say, call us traitors and say that we are down with that white woman's ideology and equating that ideology with racism. Mind you, all the fights that we tend to have with white women around race, including on your behalf in defense of brothers. And you think we get angry because we hate you. And we don't get angry because of that. We actually get angry because we're hurt. We actually get angry because we love you. And when you would rather be a man than be right, you're not communicating to us that you love us back.